Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. Today, we're going to be once again looking into some strange and odd park ranger stories. These ones are a bit weirder than normal, so definitely be prepared for a wild ride. Before we get into the video, I must say that I just moved and I am in my new studio. There's not everything that needs to be here quite yet. It's a little empty, so if it's kind of echoey, I apologize. And if the mic isn't as great as usual, I also apologize too. I'm not using my preferred setup at the moment. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a park ranger tale or something different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. Now, without further ado, let's continue into these creepy, strange, and downright spine-chilling park ranger stories. I'm going to get right into it and say when we found a body in the park. It wasn't what we expected to find. Now, every now and again, you're prone to find a body dumped in a park. I'm not saying it's the most common thing in the world, but when you're working around the state, particularly in bigger parks, these things do tend to happen. The body wasn't the strangest part of any of this, though. It was the fact that there appeared to be no reason for it. Now, allow me to elaborate. When the body was found, there were no marks on it whatsoever. There appeared to be no puncture wounds that would denote a drug overdose. No marks that indicated a fight. No bites from animals. Nothing. The most disturbing part of all of this, the smile. The woman's body we found wore a large smile. It almost seemed unnatural. That certainly isn't normal, and after some time, an autopsy was done and the cause of death was found to be unknown. That's right, they couldn't find a reason, not even by natural causes. It's as though the woman just laid down and passed away, leaving a messed up smile on her face as she did. That's impossible though, right? No one can simply will themselves to death, right? Things get stranger from here though. A few weeks after the first body, a second body was found. The circumstances were seemingly similar. A body, a smile, and no seeming cause. Fast forward a bit and it comes out that this seemingly young, healthy man had the organs of someone nearing their hundreds. If you can't wrap your head around that, no worries. I'm still unable to make any sense of this strange happening myself. How does one have a seemingly healthy body, but their internal organs show that they are well beyond the age they appear? Curious, we started looking deeper into the area. Everything seemed fine. We'd had these parks open with no problem for decades. When we had seen no other deaths for a few months, we had become a bit more comfortable. Park goers were at ease, and we were confident that we'd seen the worst of things. It was sometime around mid-February when we would be proven wrong. One of our very own complained of being sick. They were having breathing problems, feeling dizzy, and were having some significant trouble hearing, among other symptoms. We took the employee to the hospital, and they ran several tests which seemed to indicate their organs were perfectly fine. They weren't sure why they were feeling how they were, but they recommended they rest for the next few days. A couple of days went by and the same worker we'd given a couple of days off now came into work with their hair completely gray. I'm not talking dyed gray, I'm talking almost completely white, as if they were ancient. Needless to say, she was more than a little freaked out, as were we. I sat her down and asked her about it. She explained she woke up one morning and it was like this. That said, nothing else seemed off and she was feeling better, so she wanted to continue work. We allowed it, but we watched her for a time, just to be safe. It was about May when things got truly strange. On a more personal level, there had been no more reported deaths and no strange sickness of any kind around the park. The whole thing was strange, yes, but we were grateful for some quiet. I had to work late, but I sent most everyone else home. I wasn't going to be doing anything crazy, just had some paperwork to take care of. So long story short, everyone went home while I stayed in the office and did some filing and finished some paperwork I'd been putting off, as I hate paperwork. I was the only person in the station at the time this happened. I was working on my paperwork when suddenly the lights in the entire place began acting up. At first, it was a small flicker. That was followed by a sudden large surge of power and the lights going off and on. Eventually, they seemed to shut off completely. It was probably about 7 or 8, so there was still light coming in from the window, but it was waning quickly. I went ahead and checked the fuse box. Everything had been tripped. I checked to make sure nothing was wrong before flipping everything back on, and just like that, I had lights again. Sitting back down, I continued my paperwork for a couple of hours before the lights went out again. I was about to get up and check things when I heard a call for help. I will admit it was a little strange, but I figured I'd call out to see if I could determine where it was coming from, as I thought it was rather a faint sound. I called out, and then I heard screaming. Now, to describe the screaming would be to say it was pained. Though whoever was screaming were doing so from a semi-soundproof room or even the underwater. We don't have a lake anywhere near us, so that's really weird. I know it wasn't anyone in a lake. Still, I was perplexed and slightly unnerved, and as such, I tried to find the source of the screaming. I was eventually led to the front door of the station. I walked slowly toward the door and put my ear to it. It almost sounded as though the sound was coming from the other side of the door. As I looked out the windows though, I saw no one at the door, still putting my ear back to the door itself. I found that the screaming was indeed there, albeit muffled. I wasn't afraid at this point, or at least downright terrified or anything, but I did feel an unsettling feeling in my stomach. The kind you get when you're on the verge of being slightly nauseous. Almost like you know something isn't right with your body, but you haven't gotten completely sick or miserable enough as of yet to determine what the problem will ultimately be. Figuring there was only one way to determine the source of the mysterious sound, I decided to put my ear to the door again and listen. It was definitely still there despite the fact that my eyes told me different, just moments before. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Upon opening it, I felt an unusually warm wind. It was May, yes, but this was more like a midsummer heat, and stepping outside everything seemed to almost slow down. As I stared around the station, I remember seeing what looked to be pollen floating through the air. I could still hear the screams, but they were becoming more drowned out by a strange, almost underwater sound. I clearly wasn't in the water, but the sound was distorted in such a way that everything seemed to be coming through in the same sound as if you were underwater. I walked forward, and that's when I noticed my movements were slower. It seemed as though time and also myself were barely moving. It wasn't long after that I began to feel extremely hot. I could hear faintly, see the outlines and silhouettes of people, but I couldn't make out who they were. Things became very bright. Bright enough that I had to close my eyes, but even then, it was bright. Too bright. I heard a voice calling my name, and then suddenly I was awake, feverish, and laying in a hospital bed. There were doctors and nurses standing around me who looked very concerned. I was confused and asked what was going on. They explained I had a 104 fever and had flatlined not too long prior. They weren't sure what had happened, but they had found me lying on the ground at the park by a jogger. They got me an ambulance, and long story short, I had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. I had been there for 2 weeks and had been unconscious until very recently. I was in shock. I could have sworn I had just been at the station, and it took me quite a while to even believe I'd been in the hospital at all, much less for 2 weeks. I thought I was dreaming, and I kept waiting to wake up, but I never did. In the time I'd been in the hospital, I'd had every test known to man done on me. Ultimately, they weren't sure what was wrong with me. The thing is I had been sick, but No test showed any signs of actual sickness, even when I was in a comatose. The doctors had no real explanation for any of it, and I even had fewer answers. I spent another month fully recovering from my supposed sickness, and I eventually went back to work. Since that day, I've never had another problem, and we've never had another problem at the park itself, with deaths or sickness under such strange and mysterious circumstances. I didn't appear to have any major aging signs, but something strange did happen out there. I'm not sure how to explain that strange thing or why it happened. I'm even less inclined to understand why all the strange occurrences stopped 10+ years ago. I only know there are things out there for which we will never be able to explain. I work with the Washington State Park Rangers. I'm a male and about 40 now, but I was 25 when these strange happenings occurred. What happenings, you might ask? Well, it started pretty simply. I and a few of my coworkers had been told there were sightings of strange things going on in the woods of our parks. Sometimes it was tales of people believing that they saw a Bigfoot or something. Other times people swore it was aliens or ghosts. It was the usual tales, and these tales have been passed on for generations. There was always something strange going on out there according to the locals. Now, I'm not one to demean people with such stories. I don't intend to with my story. I simply state the things I state with some sarcasm, as at the time of the story and leading up to it, I was a major skeptic. If you told me about it, I'd come up with all sorts of theories and natural explanations as to why this story was not true. Usually, I could completely explain away just about any occurrence you could throw at me. Strange flickering lights, well, you clearly have an electrical issue. Seeing ghosts, what'd you put in those brownies you were eating there, son? Aliens, probably just the military doing some sort of experimental flight test. Zombies, bath salts more likely. Anyway, you get my point. I wasn't exactly a believer in much of anything supernatural or out of the ordinary. I've always found our world has fascinating and unexplained mysteries, sure, but they all have an explanation, and even if they haven't been found yet, with logic, you can solve almost anything, eventually. So being the stubborn skeptic I was, my colleagues got together one October and thought it would be a great idea to have a little wager of sorts. We'd all get together and investigate the parks at night. We'd look for any and all manner of things unexplained or supernatural, and attempt to prove or disprove it. Now, in order to do this, we had to note any of the strange happenings around from our lovely locals. On top of that, we had to make a point to collect any strange experiences that had occurred to them, be it day or night when it happened. We took down all manner of things that sounded absolutely insane, but we kept professional and took it seriously. We had all kinds of strange occurrences. Ghosts supposedly roamed our parks. Bigfoot was definitely out there and he kept taunting our local herb man. Herb man, or men, when speaking of many, was what we jokingly called those we knew were very pro-weed and did quite a bit of it. The list went on for quite a bit and was every bit as amusing as it was creepy. Now, all that aside, what happened during the month is something even my skeptical butt can't explain to this day. Our first night of investigation wasn't all that interesting or entertaining. I think some of us, yes, more than just myself, were taking this as a fun activity that would lead to nothing. The first night, it was just that. The second night, though, was a bit weirder. On the second night, while looking for proof of Bigfoot, we caught strange crying on our recording. Now, normally I'd have dismissed this as some kind of animal or audio interference in the woods, but this was also something a few of the other rangers reported hearing while out and about. We searched the area as the crying was happening. It sounded like what you would hear from a baby. Obviously, we didn't want some baby out there, abandoned or otherwise, crying without knowing the cause or being able to help. So we spent much of the night searching for the source. We never found it. This was compounded by the fact that as we searched for it, more than a few times it would get louder, and after rushing to find the source, it'd vanish and begin farther away. While everyone was perplexed, I still wasn't entirely convinced there wasn't someone out there messing with me and my team. I mean, it definitely wasn't some crying, super fast, or teleporting baby, so that made the most sense. The third night, we made a point of making sure the area was well equipped, monitored, and even blocked off to the best of our ability, as we wanted no pranksters to mess with us during our investigation. We went as far as to set up cameras in some of the trees or under certain rocks to monitor the area and catch anything we couldn't. It was late in the night. I'm sorry I don't remember exactly what time it was, as it's been quite a while since these experiences, when we heard that same crying again. It was the sound of a baby, and it was clear and distinct. Concerned something may actually be wrong, also irked someone might still be trying to mess with us, we decided to attack the sound from multiple directions. It was during this time that we all came upon the source from multiple directions. The problem was when we got there, everything was quiet. There was no crying, no sounds outside of nature, and no one could have been messing with us at this point. We searched high and low for a device of some kind, a mic or anything, but we never turned up anything of significance. The next day we checked out all of the footage. It was a Friday, and we turned up the sound, but nothing. The thing is, the sound would move. It would appear to jump from place to place, but no one could hear anything from the sound. Nothing was physically seen, and nothing was caught on the cameras. Figuring the weekend was coming up and intrigued by this mystery, we decided to spend the weekend camping in the park. We kept the area we had been searching cordoned off, but it was also an area people weren't really using for camping anyway. Most of those areas were further out, and the noises we had been hearing seemed to be coming from the general area we had been searching anyway. Friday night, nothing happened. Saturday night, all was quiet. Sunday, we all decided to go home, get some rest, but keep everything running overnight, just in case. Monday morning when we came in, we found the crying to be happening again. The sound on several occasions would appear in one area before going silent, and seconds later, the crying would pick up in a completely different area on the other side of the park from the first crying noise. I will admit, at this point I was intrigued and also at a loss for an explanation of any of this. Now Halloween was approaching, and as such we would soon need to get the park ready for a celebration we were going to be having. So, we really only had another night or two to be able to set up properly and research what was happening. Deciding we couldn't do these things Monday because of schedules outside of work being fairly busy, we all decided to meet up the next day for a final push at figuring out what was going on in the park. Tuesday morning we come in to find the same noise again. Even stranger, this noise was heard in our own station at one point. No one has ever seen anything on camera, but the noise was definitely there. We kept our station monitored at all times, and we do have sound to our security feed. Anyway, we were all excited for the night to come. I'll admit, I was even more excited than I should have been, and probably the most excited I've been in quite a while over anything strange or mysterious. I still believe there would be some kind of logical explanation, but I hoped we would discover it and be able to ease our curiosity and solve the mystery. Tuesday night came, and with it came the sound of a crying baby. We spent most of the night searching the area, but I had stayed behind in the station as we heard the strange phenomena there as well. The sound kept disappearing until I heard it in a room with me. It was very clear, very distinct, and I felt something in the room. I remember how cold things got, and I remember turning around slowly as my hairs were standing on end. The sound was so distinct it was as though I could hear it right from behind me. I felt a cold sort of breath and I heard a woman's voice. "Help us," she said. I turned, and to my shock there was a woman dressed in a black dress that didn't appear to be anything from this time period. It looked like something straight out of the 1920s. She had a baby swaddled in her arms and she looked just like you or me. She didn't seem to be translucent. I remember stuttering and stammering. I wanted to ask her how I could help, but all I could get out was the stammering. I couldn't get words out. She asked if I knew of any way to quiet her baby. She seemed desperate and began to cry herself. She kept holding and rocking the baby, but it wouldn't stop crying. Then, just like that, the woman and baby vanished before my eyes. I didn't know how to react, and I remember sitting down, perplexed for what seemed like hours before I heard a knocking at the door that shot me off my seat. It was then I heard one of my coworkers asking to be let in. I had forgotten I had locked the door. I let them in and tried to explain to all of them what I witnessed. I remember their hesitation to believe me, but at first, they felt like I was messing with them. Then we reviewed the footage, and to my shock, the voice of the woman and crying were there, but they weren't visibly seen on camera. The entire crew looked around perplexed at one another before deciding to call it a night. Since this incident, we've done some research looking for this woman, but we found nothing. I'm not sure how to explain this moment, or the series of odd events that we experienced over that month. For once in my life, though, I have no logical explanation, and since these experiences, I've become less of a skeptic. I do believe in ghosts, but I'm still skeptical of most of the stories, as many can be explained by natural causes and occurrences. That night, however, still can't be explained at all. My story is rather short, but still unsettling for me. I worked for the park rangers for about 5 years before having to quit. The reason I felt like quitting was because of the strange occurrences happening around my workplace. There were odd lights at night and strange bodies found. I won't say where I was working, as I'm scared if I do, something may happen to me. I know that sounds super conspiratorial and paranoid, but that's how I feel after everything. The first time anything weird or out of normal happened was in May of my first year on the job. A strange light was reported from the sky at night around 11-ish. What was stranger was the next day we found a body in the same exact spot as the lights. The body was charred to a crisp, but nothing else around the body was burned at all. We're talking in the middle of the woods where a fire would have broken out easily. Strange as it was, things settled down for like 3 more years after that, before another incident happened. This one was on the anniversary of the first, and again, strange lights had been seen. Then, a burned corpse was left behind. I was weirded out, but still wasn't feeling threatened per se. It wasn't until my final year of working that I felt like I needed to leave the entire situation. I was working late to help out some of my coworkers, and for some overtime. If you've ever worked government work, you'd know, for someone newer and in general, overtime is rare, and you should jump at that chance when you get it. Anyway, I was meandering the parks and helping clean up when I saw something terrifying. It wouldn't have been terrifying under normal circumstances, but considering the strange happenings of the previous years, this freaked me out. It was a light, a very bright light, and it seemed to beam down just over the hill ahead of me. I could see nothing else in the sky, just this beam. I ran toward the top of the hill, and when I crested over it, I looked down to see someone screaming. They were on fire and screaming, but, stranger still, there was no sound. I could clearly see them writhing in pain and screaming, but I couldn't hear a single word from them. I wanted to help this person and ran down the hill as fast as I could. The light vanished and the person's body fully ignited in flames. I'm talking huge flames. The thing is, though, nothing around this person was even slightly burned. It was now. I could hear the screams clearly, and I attempted to put the person out. I radioed to the station for backup and attempted to put this person out. Nothing stopped the flames. No matter what we threw on it or sprayed on it, the flame wouldn't recede. Eventually, it died out on its own after what I would assume was probably a good half hour. During that time period, this person writhed and screamed, but eventually they lay still, the fire continuing to burn until it stopped. The person was dead, obviously, but I remember being so shaken by what I had witnessed that I quit that night. My department liked me and tried to keep me on, but I refused. I wasn't about to work in that area any longer, much less that job. Soon after this happened, there were reports of men in suits investigating the matter. I got a knock on the door and was asked about what I saw. Outside of that, nothing ever came of it. I told them I had no desire to go back to my job and I was done talking about what I had seen. The guys seemed like normal guys. They showed FBI badges and I have no reason to believe they weren't FBI. Sometimes you hear about men in black and their supposedly strange air, but these guys seemed completely normal. Well, at least they did till the night my house was lit up by a bright light. I wasn't home. Actually, I was pulling into my driveway when it happened. It was the same light I saw burn that person alive. I immediately left the area and I have since moved far, far away. I don't plan on ever going back to where I lived previously. Why would I, since my house burned to the ground? I feel that the guys who visited me were probably FBI, but whatever burnt those things, the beam of light, I feel it was some sort of government weapon they were testing. You can call me crazy, you can call me paranoid, you can call me whatever, but I'm telling you, I know what I saw, and I'm damn sure I don't trust the government after that. I'm a man and I'm in my 60s. I work in Nevada with the state park rangers. Back in the 90s, we had a rush of unexplainable disappearances around our parks. These are things that were kept rather hush, but for which I'd like to share my experiences with you now. The first one was on the outskirts of our park. There was a man driving through the area around 10-ish. A camper reported seeing him and watching his truck stop near the entrance. Thinking nothing of it, he went back about his business. The next day, the truck was still there with no sign of the driver at all. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of anything really. The truck was there and remained abandoned until it was eventually towed away a few weeks later. The driver was never seen or heard from again. No one tried to claim the truck, nothing. A year later, in '91, a woman came to report her son missing. He had been camping in our park and was supposed to be home a few days ago. She knew where he liked to camp, and when he did camp, he took her straight to his site. We found a tent, some extra food, some shoes, the man's clothes, and everything looked relatively mundane, aside from not finding the man, of course. We searched for weeks and never found the man. 6 months later, we had another missing camper. This one was supposedly seen jogging and screaming while naked before not being seen again. The next missing camper didn't occur until '94. This was a group of campers though. It was a church that had summer camping trips. They had made them every year. Most everyone returned home, but it was noticed and reported that 2 of the counselors never made it back to the church. They had left with them, but had been following the church bus back in their own vehicle. Somewhere along the way, they lost them, but just figured they'd stop for gas or something and catch up. When they never came back, they were reported to the police, who strangely found their vehicles in our parks, parked and with no sign of the drivers. This was stranger because the churchgoers knew for a fact that they had left with them. It was speculated they went back for something they forgot, but we never had anyone come in looking for anything missing during that time frame, and certainly no one matching the description of said counselors. The last missing person attached to the parks around our area. It happened in 1998. This was a female college student that kept very close contact with her family, who on the last day of her campout, didn't report in with her family. This naturally concerned the family, and while they tried to remain calm and rational about things, it didn't take them very long to contact the local authorities and our parks to report their daughter missing. The young woman's car was found parked in the same spot it had been when she started her camping trip. The area was searched and eventually her belongings and her tent were found abandoned. There was no explanation as to what happened to the woman, or any sign of struggle having been made. Much like the others who went missing during that decade, there seemed to be no sign of anything having gone wrong. It was as though they simply vanished into thin air. Now, normally, with these sorts of things, you'd get some conspiracy going crazy about aliens or something, but there were never any strange objects reported in the area, or bright lights, or any of that during this time frame. At least, nowhere in the area where these people went missing. I'm a matter-of-fact guy, and I like to have hard facts before presenting any real theories. No bodies have been found in regard to the missing, and there's no evidence to suggest anything went wrong. As such, I can't even begin to speculate what happened to these people, and my heart goes out to their families, as they have no answers either. I find these missing person cases rather strange, and while I have no way of knowing if they are linked or what is going on for sure, I hope the families can find closure one day. No matter what happened, no family should ever be without answers when something happens to a loved one. I've seen firsthand how agonizing that is for a family, and I pray for answers to come someday soon. I know there really isn't a lot to go with these missing peoples, but I know there isn't a lot of information to go on with these missing persons, but if you have any thoughts about what might have happened, feel free to speculate. But I ask you to do so respectfully with the thought in mind of how you would feel if you were one of the family members. Anyways, thank you for listening to my story. My name is Jana, and I've been with the park rangers for some time around 6 years. My experience occurs in the Midwest. I'm not comfortable saying exactly where. About 3 years ago in December. The weather is very cold during the winter, and if you're working out in the wilderness, it can be very dangerous. We have certain people who like to camp despite the cold, and while we don't really recommend it, we still have to search for said people if they disappear. There was a man in his 60s who went missing late November and was reported as such the beginning of December. We had a general idea of where he was going, where he was camping, and we even found his campsite rather quickly. The problem was, things weren't as easy after that. We found wolf tracks and we found blood. We did not, however, find a body or any other sign of the man. At least initially anyway. The search continued for quite some time until one day, while patrolling, we found a human arm. The arm was being chewed on by a wolf, which then ran off upon being approached. This was rather strange. The testing on the arm did eventually determine that it belonged, unfortunately, to our missing camper. The man had been presumed dead at this point, and the search was already called off. Still feeling horrible for the family, and being the type of person I am, I went off in search of the man's body. I drove back to his campsite and went off in the general direction we had seen the blood originally trailing. I realized this wasn't the wisest move, especially considering that there was quite a bit of snow following and worse weather expected later on. That said, I felt so bad for his family, and I kept thinking, if it were my family member, I'd want closure and potentially the rest of the body to bury, or at least answers. So I continued my trek until I heard something in the distance. I can't describe the sound other than to say it was loud and like nothing I'd ever heard in my life. It wasn't a wolf. If it had been, it would have had to have been the largest wolf ever known to man. The sound was so deep and unnerving, and the wind had begun to pick up. The snow whipping my face. I debated turning around, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I continued forward, looking for any sign or hint of what had happened to this man, or more specifically, where the rest of him was. It was assumed the wolves have eaten his body or something along those lines. I wanted to find confirmation though. I needed to find bones or something more for the family. It killed me inside imagining how they felt. I've always been a caring person, and I've always gone well out of my way to help others. It's part of why I love this job so much. I keep stressing this so I can justify to you why I was doing what I did, as I know there are going to be a lot of people who may hear this story who are going to just think I'm stupid for searching for this man, especially knowing he is likely dead. Anyway, I continued my search until I found a cave. Turning on a flashlight I had brought with me, I searched the cave. His remains, or what was left of them, were sitting in the open in the cave. I knew where his remains were, and how to find them, so I was getting ready to head back, to get a better crew and maybe remove the remains when I heard what sounded like a loud and horrendous screech. I was startled at first, but I got my wits about me fairly quickly and began to head out of the cave. It was then I saw something I can't properly describe. It was massive. I couldn't even see the entire thing in the snow, but what I saw terrified me stiff. I felt an uncontrollable fear take my body and I went limp, crying and praying. I couldn't get my legs to move out of the shock of what I was seeing. Then I heard that loud sound again. It was then I realized it was coming from this monstrosity. The thing, from what I can tell, has flesh hanging from its bones, and some of it looked human. I wanted to get up, but there was nothing I could do initially. My mind was saying go, but my body wouldn't move. I kept thinking, if I don't move, I'm dead. Then I heard several loud howls and the thing appeared to turn its attention away from me. I snapped back to it and began running with all the might my legs could carry. I ran all the way back toward the direction of my truck. The snow was growing heavier and the wind kept getting stronger. I continued pressing on anyway, and as I did, I thought I could hear the yelping of wolves. It sounded like they were fighting whatever was out there. After what felt like hours, I made it back to my pickup and got in, driving away and back to the station. I explained everything to my supervisor, who understandably chided me before organizing a search crew to head back out and grab the remains. In the end, what was found was several wolves, some of which had been ripped in half, strewn all over the snow. There was a ton of blood in the entrails of many animals as well. There was no sign of the monstrosity I had seen in the wilderness, but I was grateful for that. I felt horrible for the wolves, however, as they were clearly all dead, and if it wasn't for them, I probably would have been dead as well. I've never seen anything so large or terrifying in my life. I mean, I didn't even see the whole fight, but crap, this thing had me shaking in my boots. It was easily the most terrifying and insanely unexplainable thing I've ever witnessed in my life. We were able to recover most of the camper's remains and the family was able to bury him properly. For that at least, I am thankful. I'll never get, nor do I wish to, the answers as to what that monstrosity was. But I can't even imagine the horror that camper must have felt. I feel he more than likely ran into this thing, and not the wolves. Anyway, thank you for using my story. I've been a park ranger for many years. For the most part, things have been pretty relaxing. I've never encountered anything supernatural, and the story I'm about to share isn't going to be one of those accounts. No. Instead, I'm going to share a story about one morning that started like any other shift. I was patrolling the parks in one area one summer morning. I live in the state of Washington, by the way. Something caught my eye this morning, though. There was a dark shape in the distance, and it was just far enough away that I couldn't make out what it was. Still, it was close to a trail that is frequented heavily by the public, and so I figured I'd take a look just to be on the safe side. I parked my truck on the side of the trail, locked up, and headed toward the horizon. The area was too dense for me to drive my truck through, and I didn't really want to get stuck there either. So as I got closer to the shape, it began to take a familiar form. As it turned out, there was a black bear roaming the trail. Now, I didn't think much of it, other than I needed to perhaps lure the bear away a bit. After all, I didn't want anyone roaming the trails to come across or aggravate the bear. Anyway, I walked forward thinking, like most animals, it'd notice me and move along before I approached it. But while it did notice me, it seemed to stop and stand its ground. Getting closer, I noticed it seemed to be getting defensive, and so I called in some backup and waited, making sure that no one came by or bothered the animal. As I waited, I observed the bear. It was rather large, even for a bear, and seemed intent on holding the position it had. This wouldn't normally be a problem or a bother at all, but unfortunately, it was too close to the trail and to people. We couldn't have someone wander by and disturb the bears and get mauled. Backup didn't take long to arrive, and we spent the next hour or so trying to get the bear to move. Unfortunately, it wouldn't budge, and anytime we got too close, the bear would begin showing its teeth. Fearing for my team's safety and my own, I told them to back off and we'd call in someone who could help. I got an animal control specialist on the line and explained the situation very thoroughly to them. I was informed they'd send someone shortly and they'd bring what was needed to handle the situation. Now, at this point we also called the sheriff's office in case things got out of hand, or there was no way to safely move the bear along. We wanted to be sure first and foremost that the public would be safe in the future. We did respect the fact that the bear was living its life and the land was the bear's home, and we had no intention of shooting the bear. We just wanted someone with a weapon around in the event things got out of hand. I had a few of my team step back and give the bear its space, and it wasn't long before both animal control and the sheriffs arrived. We used the sheriffs to help keep people away, and one waited on standby in case we had to deal with the bear. The animal control officer also brought a rifle. It wasn't to kill though. This one was loaded with tranquilizers, so if need be, we would hopefully be able to put the bear to sleep and move it to a safer area. We watched the bear for a bit longer before we made the plan of action. I decided I'd try to move the bear along once more, and as I did that, I'd have animal control come with me, at the ready, in case they had to utilize the tranquilizers. We also had a sheriff ready in the event it came to something grimmer, but we didn't think that'd be necessary. We prefer something like that to be used only in an absolute emergency. The bear would have to be mauling one of us for us to be ready to use deadly force, and I want to stress again, we aren't in the business of harming animals. I slowly approached the bear once again, and with each step I felt the tension and anticipation mounting. I may have had all the cover in the world, but I was still terrified something might go wrong. I tried to outwardly keep myself composed, and I kept my hands out trying to show it's okay. I wasn't going to hurt the bear. The closer we got to the bear, the more entrenched it became. It gave us what I imagined was a warning roar before baring its teeth and backing closer to a nearby tree. I motioned to the animal control to wait and not to do anything quite yet. I then slowly, very slowly moved forward. The bear took a step backward, toward the tree, and as it did, I caught a glimpse of something dark. I couldn't tell what it was, and I began to feel curiosity mixed in with my initial fear. I looked at the bear more closely, and as I did, I started to get a different feeling from it. I don't know if that's possible, but I definitely felt a different feeling in the air at least. Taking another step forward, I noticed the bear held its ground and showed its teeth once again. I kept my hands up and attempted to let it know that I wasn't there to harm it. I even asked the animal control officer to lower the tranquilizer gun they were using. As I did, I saw the bear look over at the animal control officer and then at me before taking a step back again, toward this tree. This time I didn't take another step forward, but rather I tried to see what the dark thing behind the bear was. Then it happened. The thing came out and let out the cutest roar I had ever heard. I immediately felt my panic and fear change to relief, and I motioned to everyone to back away slowly. As it turned out, the bear was in the area because she was watching over her cub. When we realized what was going on, we backed off, and sure enough, the cub was done roaming the area. It and the mama bear strode off into the woods and left. As the sheriff and animal control left, I regrouped with my team, and we all had a good laugh. To this day, I'm grateful nothing bad happened in that incident. It could have gone a lot worse and turned out really bad. We all handled the situation correctly though. I always use this as an example when training new rangers of how to properly assess and manage a situation when you aren't fully sure what said situation is like. We originally thought the bear was taking up refuge or even had set up a home in the area. We took the actions we believed necessary to remove the bear, but also to keep the bear and the general populace at large safe. We of course were wrong about our initial thoughts, as the bear wasn't trying to start a home or anything like that. Because we didn't panic though, we were able to figure out the real reason the bear was there, and thus the bear was able to go back to its home safe and sound, and we were able to go back to work like nothing had ever happened. Long story short, always be prepared but never panic. That can apply to this situation, but I think it applies to life in general as well. We live in a world so quick to panic over every little thing. Next time you think about doing such, reassess your situation and see if it's really as dire as you initially believed it to be. I'm a 26-year-old male, and I've been with the park rangers for 8 years. I grew up in Texas, and that's where I still work today. Now, for the longest time, I wasn't sure how to categorize or even believe the things I'd witnessed. That said, having listened to this channel and having done research since this incident, I feel much more comfortable about everything that happened. In my first year as a park ranger, much of what I did involved keeping the forest clean and the park safe. A lot of it was grunt work. I'd help out with various projects with my supervisors, but at the time, being a rookie, I wasn't required to do anything really involved, so to speak. That meant much of my work was just interacting with people, doing surveys about how they liked the park, if we kept it clean enough, etc. What we could do to improve said parks, and sometimes just sparking conversation to see what's on people's minds. This was of course in conjunction with keeping the area clean and doing the other grunt work involved. It was May when I first encountered what I couldn't explain. We had been having a lot of wolves popping up in the area, and while, for the most part, we were able to move them along, there was one which didn't seem like the rest. We began to call this wolf endearingly by the nickname Trouble. Now, Trouble specialized in getting into just that. She was always rooting through trash or chasing onlookers away, but she never seemed to harm anyone. She just caused a lot of headaches. We'd been dealing with her for a while, but this time, things were a bit weirder. I'd just gotten word that a wolf was in the area that matched her description, and so I headed out to deal with her. Apparently, she was chasing hikers off the trail and rooting through the trash. As I arrived at the scene, Trouble stopped what she was doing and looked right at me. The way she looked at me was strange though. She gave the most innocent look, and was almost a human expression I'd ever seen a wolf give. I was taken back just a bit, but attempted to run her off. As I got closer, she'd back away. When I gave chase, she bolted in the other direction. I informed my supervisor everything was okay, and also let everyone know if they saw that wolf again, let us know immediately. I explained it was generally more of a nuisance than anything, but they shouldn't take any chances and should come get us if they see her. We hadn't been able to catch her as of yet, but I secretly hoped that I'd be the one to do so someday. We had wanted to do so, to move Trouble to a safer area, where we were sure she wouldn't be harmed by anyone, and no one would be harmed by her. She was just so fast though, and there was no way we could ever get anyone like an animal control there in time, as she had always fled. We had tried a few times. She'd run off long before they'd ever arrive though. I went about the rest of my day doing my normal duties and everything was fine. It was when I was clocking out and getting ready to leave that things got strange again. I was getting in my car and about to start it up when I noticed a familiar face staring at me from the woods. It was Trouble. My initial thought was to call someone, and so I pulled out my phone. But the moment I did and got ready to dial before I could finish doing so, she was gone. I just sighed and started my car up before driving home. I remember snickering about how we'd catch her one of these days. Honestly, the whole thing made me feel like I was in one of those old cartoons. You know, the ones where you're always trying to get that sneaky little animal. Anyway, I went home, and soon after my evening routine of showering, eating, and watching some TV, I crashed. In the middle of the night, I was shocked awake by the sound of one of my trash cans falling over. I pulled out my gun and grabbed a flashlight before slipping on my shoes and heading out to investigate. I found my trash can and some trash, which I cleaned up, and also some wolf prints in the dirt. I followed the prints for a bit, but eventually they led to a road, at which point I could no longer track them. I went back home and locked up once I was inside. I was glancing out the window when I saw that face again. Trouble. Now, my first thought was maybe I was mistaken, and I was pretty tired, so I ignored it. Looking back though, I'm fairly certain it was her. On the next day of work, I was rather tired. I'm someone who needs uninterrupted sleep to function properly, so it was a rough morning. As I went about my morning duties, I came upon Trouble, rummaging through one of the trash containers. Rather than alert her, I stepped back a bit and radioed my supervisors that she was rummaging through the trash again. I was informed to keep a distance, but watch her, and they'd call animal control, and hopefully we'd be able to put a stop to things soon. It didn't take any time for all of them to arrive from what I could tell. Trouble was mostly eating old food. The plan was to tranquilize her and move her. Nothing too crazy, and at first we thought the plan was going to go off fine. A tranquilizer was fired and hit her. She woozily wobbled off for a second, before shaking her head and darting off into the woods. We gave chase, but we couldn't find her anywhere. So I was tasked with keeping an eye out for her and also continuing the search. If I found her, I was to radio my supervisors and let them know I'd found her. I agreed and began searching the general area. I was able to find some wolf tracks after a bit of searching. I debated radioing my supervisors, but I wanted to be sure it was her before calling it in. Following the tracks, things started to get weird. The wolf's tracks seemed like they were either messed up or changing in some way. They went from wolf tracks to strange dirt formations to human feet. I wasn't sure what to think in that moment, but I continued following the track quite a ways. It was when I finally found where they led. Deep in the woods, there was a woman. She was passed out and was naked. Still in her side, to my shock, was a tranquilizer dart. I'm not sure if she heard me or what happened. She somehow came to. She looked at me, freaked out, and ran off. I tried to give chase, but she bolted over the hill. By the time I reached the top of the hill, there was once again an all too familiar face. It was Trouble, looking a bit tired, but okay overall. She darted into the woods, and we never saw her again. I'm a female park ranger in Washington who has been working for a good 22 years before retiring. Back in 2001 winter to be more specific, I was working cleanup on the trails. Mostly though, I was driving around and making sure things looked fine. I was supposed to be observing the trails as they get rather muddy in the rain, and in Washington we get plenty of rain. I'm not talking in total, but just in the fact it feels like it's raining all the time. The rain is generally lighter rain, but still it's there quite a bit. The day was going to be an easy day if I'm honest. It was supposed to be an easy day anyway. Rainy days for me at the time mostly involved driving and not much else. I'm of course very happy with this fact. So I'm cruising along listening to the radio when I think I hear loud screaming. It's quick and I turn my radio off and listen intently. Then I hear it again. It sounds fairly distant, and I'm not 100% sure where it's coming from. Slowly, I drive the area, speeding up only when I happen to be going uphill. Mostly as a precaution so that I can make sure that I make it through all the mud. That's when I hear a clear scream for help. I have somewhat narrowed down the source of the sound when I hear it once more. This time I can tell it's coming from higher up, and so I floor it. As I'm driving, it doesn't take long before I can see the problem. Hanging from the side of a large drop-off is a woman who looks to be about 19 or 20. She is screaming, understandably, and hanging off a branch dug into the side of a large hill. The poor woman looks terrified, and I contact my supervisors to let them know of the situation. It's raining, muddy, and I'm scared that at any point this woman could lose her grip, or the rain could make the root-looking branch she's hanging from come out of the side of the hill and drop her to her death. The drop is long, and I am informed to monitor the situation and that they would be there shortly with backup and help. I'm looking at this girl and scared for her, and I'm not sure she has enough to wait, so I drive up the trail and get closer to where this girl is hanging from. I have some rope stashed in my truck and it's fairly lengthy, and so I get to work wrapping it around the largest tree I can find. I then drop it over the side and realize it's not quite long enough. The young woman looks so scared, and that's when I notice the branch she is holding on to slips out and drops somewhat before stopping and swaying. So now this girl is screaming her lungs out for help, crying and repeating she doesn't want to die. I look over the edge and see how steep this drop-off is. I'm terrified of heights. I should have mentioned that much sooner. Still, at that moment, watching this woman scream and realizing what's left of what is coming out of the side of the hill isn't going to stay in the side of the hill much longer, I make a choice to stop waiting. It wasn't safe, nor was it what my supervisors, or myself for that matter, would have wanted if it could be avoided, but I couldn't wait any longer. Help wasn't going to arrive before this woman likely fell to her death. She looked about my age, and all I could think of was, if this situation was reversed, wouldn't I want someone to at least try to help me? So I grabbed the rope, and as quickly as possible I scaled down the side of the large drop-off. I didn't have time to be safe about it or properly tie off, so I was terrified. That all said, my adrenaline was flowing, and all I could think was, don't let go and you'll be fine. I quickly made it to the end of the rope and hung off as far as I could. I then reached down with one hand and told the girl to grab my hand. It's important to note that I'm no slouch, and I still to this day work out quite often. So, I was confident the woman who looked much smaller and lighter wasn't going to take us both down. Once she had my hand, I asked her to use the side of the hill to climb up until she could piggyback on me, if that makes sense. Without hesitation, she did, and as we began climbing back up, we heard something fall. I ignored it and kept pushing forward with the limb. Ultimately, we were able to get back up on the hill, and both of us survived and intact, at which point we both laid down and took a moment to calm ourselves. Once it set in we were alive, we hugged one another tightly and just relished in the moment. The young woman's name was Riley, and I remember how grateful she was and that she was crying, which made me cry in happiness. My supervisors arrived and I explained the situation. They understood the situation, and after speaking with them, I wasn't punished for my actions. My supervisors felt my actions were justified, and this was cemented when we were coming back down the trail and I noticed that the branch that had been hanging had fallen out from the side of the hill. I thank God every day that He put me where I was that day and allowed me to overcome my fears and save Riley. It should be mentioned that we did keep contact and eventually became best friends, and we still are today. I live in Mississippi, and I'm an 82-year-old, long-retired park ranger. I won't waste time, and I'm going to get straight to the point. I believe in intelligent life outside of our own in the large universe that we live in. I've held these beliefs for a long time. The thing that cemented such beliefs, though, were way back when I was a much younger man when I saw something I can't explain under normal circumstances. I witnessed something that took a coyote, if that makes sense anyway. I don't care if you believe me or if you think I'm some kooky old fool. I'm just going to tell you what I saw. I was patrolling the parks when I got a call about a coyote in the area. I had told my superiors that I'd investigate and get rid of the thing. While walking to the area in question, it wasn't very far. Sure enough, there was a coyote. It appeared to have itself a snack though. What animal, I'm not sure. I tried to scare the thing, but it mostly ignored me in favor of its snack. Annoyed, I prepared to handle the situation myself and proceeded to head to the coyote's direction. I was probably only a few feet away when suddenly I hear a strange whirring sound. I look around and I don't see a damn thing. Still, the sound is obvious and clearly actually happening. The next thing I know, the coyote is up and into the air. I don't see a beam of light or anything, it's just the coyote floating up. Then it vanishes. I don't do drugs and I don't drink or any of that. I was terrified at that moment. I had plenty of sleep and I damn sure wasn't hallucinating. This wasn't the only incident though. This was merely the first time. A few weeks later, I'm walking the parks and thinking about what I had witnessed while keeping an eye out for a good spot to take lunch. I never told anyone I worked for about the previous incident because, come on, they'd laugh at me in an instant for sure. So I find a nice clearing and decide I'll sit down, pull out my lunch, and eat in peace. It's at this moment I can see something in the distance. It's tall, thin, and seems to have no real body hair. I can't tell from where I'm at exactly what it is, but it's enough to pique my curiosity. So I get up, and as I do, the thing disappears. It didn't go into the air though. It was like the coyote. It was like 1 second it was there, and then it wasn't. Confused, I keep looking around, but I can't find what I saw. Suddenly I hear that same whirring sound and then it fades. Soon after I hear a sonic boom like a jet, but much louder, and I saw the trees swaying and felt the ground shake for a moment. It was only for a moment though, like something had suddenly launched at a high rate of speed, but I never saw anything in the sky. A couple of years later in winter, I'm getting ready to finish my shift. I haven't seen or experienced anything strange since the previous incident, and to be honest, I pretty much let it go as something I'll never truly understand by that point. Anyway, I'm rounding up some trash and doing my final checkups before I clock out, when I hear a familiar whirring. I remember feeling weird and then suddenly looking up as I noticed the hair on my body raising, and then I blacked out. The next thing I know, I'm waking up to my phone ringing. I pick it up and say, "Hello?" On the other end is my very angry boss who wants to know where I went and why I left my truck door open with the keys in the truck and running the previous night. I explained to my boss I wasn't sure why, and I couldn't quite remember. My boss, who normally was a very understanding man, gave me a piece of his mind and several choice words before telling me if it ever happened again, I was going to be fired. I apologized and told him I totally understood. I've never had anything else happen like that since, but I'm not sure how to explain any of this without sounding completely crazy. But I assure you I experienced what I experienced. To this day, I'm at a complete loss as to what actually happened and how I lost the time I lost. I'm also completely confused as to how I wound up sleeping in my bed or even got home. I was able to keep my job ultimately, and I enjoyed a wonderful career the remainder of my time as a park ranger before retiring. Outside of those odd incidents, I can honestly say it's the best job I ever had, and I'm grateful it was my career ultimately. As to those incidents, I am strongly of the belief that I may have been abducted. I don't have a less sane sounding theory or any memory of what happened to me that time I blacked out, but it's the only explanation I could give. At any rate, there are certain things we can't explain going on in the world, and I'd say these things qualify as some of them. Hi there, my name is Jay and I've been with the Park Rangers for 15 years. I work in Montana and I want to share a short story about how lucky I am to still be here today. Now my story isn't long or grandly glorious, but it involves an 80-year-old man named Walt. Walt is a regular goer of the parks I watch over, and I and many of our regular park goers are quite familiar with him. I've changed his name for the purposes of keeping his identity safe, but he's a friendly guy. Many a shift he would tell me tales about local legends or even just of his wife Margie. You never know what he'd talk about, but you could be sure that it would be a great conversation and leaving you feeling happier no matter what kind of day you were having at the time. So one day I found myself sitting at a bench during lunch. The day was nice, cool, and quite relaxing. Up to this point, I'd occasionally head off a little way out of the way for lunch. This was such a beautiful day, I thought, why the hell not? So I headed down the trail and eventually branched off down the beaten path to a little known area on a hill. It was here I sat down, pulled out a sandwich, and chilled. The sun was beautiful, and I couldn't have been happier. Suddenly, I felt what I thought was gas. I breathed through it at first. The more I struggled to do so, the harder it became to breathe. It was only seconds before I found myself keeled over, desperately gasping for air. It was only seconds before I found myself keeled over and desperately gasping for air. It was only seconds, but it felt like hours. In my confusion, I remember thinking, well, at least I'll die in a beautiful place. That was it. That was my last thought before I felt myself passing out. The next moments were a bit of a blur. I heard a voice and it was familiar. It was from Walt. I remember thinking I was dead and not really being sure what was happening. Was I really hearing Walt? I couldn't be too sure. Then suddenly I feel myself breathing slightly better and things begin to come into focus. It's hard to explain the event as I was super out of it and still certain I was dead. I remember being dragged and some calling out. "Over here!" a very familiar voice said. "I think he might make it, but he's looking rough." Suddenly, in what appeared to be a blink of an eye, I imagine it was me passing out and waking up. It was all very fever dreamish. I am awakened in a hospital. I have my girlfriend, some nurses, my parents, and well, Walt standing over me. I remember confusion but also a sudden calm coming over me. I asked if I was dead, but my girlfriend smacked me and quickly realized I wasn't. My parents were crying as she had. Walt, on the other hand, just wore a big ol' smile. "You can't go dying on us, son. You're much too young." The way Walt said that cracked me up, and soon after I asked what happened. Walt explained, and as I came to find out, I had a heart attack. A pretty large one. It wasn't common for someone my age, but it happened sometimes. Thankfully, by sheer luck, Walt had been hiking, and often stopped in that same spot I was eating lunch at the time, to admire the view. When he found me, he called 911, and he also drugged me closer so they could reach me and get me to the ambulance faster. Walt had saved my life. The nurses and doctors even informed me that had he not found me, there was a 90% chance I would not have survived. So yeah, I'm eternally indebted to Walt. Well, my whole family is actually. I eventually married my wife and we had a little boy. I can't help but be grateful to be alive today, and every time I see Walt, I take all the time I possibly can just to spare to listen to him and his many stories. What happened to me can happen to anyone, regardless of your age. I was blessed that as rare as this was, I survived. I've since gotten into working out within my bounds and just eating healthier. I'm not saying this to tell you to do the same. I'm sharing this story to let you know you should appreciate every moment you have on this earth. Life is short, and we never know when it could be our time. It would have been mine if it had not been for Walt. I can promise you, I'm very grateful for every second I still live today. You can call me Jimmy, and I'm a park ranger who has been working in this profession for roughly 12 years. Now, I want to share a story about some caves in the area I work in. We've had people go missing in the area for quite some time. Now, I know that's not exactly a strange happening in an area with caves, but there's a bit more to it than that. You see, oftentimes people will say the entrances to some of the caves will, near nightfall, appear to have voices echoing from them. This has likened those of us who work in the area to call these the dead caves. Now, that is just something those in our department use to describe the strange caves and their phenomena. That isn't really something you'll likely hear those in the area use. At least, not to my knowledge. Anyway, it's a pretty spooky thing as I've obviously looked into this myself on a few occasions. And yes, it does indeed sound like voices come from these caves. That would be strange enough, but the thing that is stranger still is the fact that the voices sound quite real. It's as though someone was standing at the entrance and calling you there. It's eerie. Anyway, this has caused some trouble from time to time, but for the most part, people generally leave the area alone. And before you ask, no. We don't run tours of the caves, so it isn't anything like that. Even if we did, we wouldn't be doing this near nightfall. At any rate, I suppose I should get to the point. This story is very personal to me. I had my nephew go missing in these very caves a few years ago, and this story is about the time I assisted a search and rescue team to try to help find him. I suppose this story could fall under your search and rescue or park ranger stories, as I am a park ranger, but feel free to use it for either. That out of the way, my nephew had been missing for a little over 24 hours when we began our search proper. The last place we knew him to be was the caves in the area. Right out of the gate, something seemed off. His gear had been found at the entrance. This was definitely his gear too, as he always kept a sack with his name stitched into it, so if he lost his gear, or as was the case he went missing, whoever happened upon it would know who to look for, or who to return the lost gear to. It's important to note, my nephew and I had gone spelunking together on many occasions, and even a few times on our own. He wasn't new to this, and he was plenty capable of making his way through a cave, new or old, alone. So the fact is his gear was at the entrance, abandoned, was strange. Our initial thought was maybe something happened and he didn't wind up in the actual cave. As such, we had everyone who was certified to do cave search and rescue continue canvassing the area throughout the rest of the park itself. Our team continued deeper into the caves. Caves are generally dark places and sometimes this can lead people to seeing things. What I'm about to tell you, I assure you, wasn't me seeing things. While searching the caves, we could hear screaming. The screaming sounded a lot like my nephew's voice, but it's a cave and we couldn't be sure. I shouted for my nephew, but when I did, everything fell silent. It was while panning the area I saw something rush out of the corner of my eye. It looked like human feet. I quickly pointed out what I saw and we proceeded in the direction I saw the feet. When we got to where I had seen things though, there was no one there. I began to grow worried. The screaming we had heard earlier sounded horrific. the kind of screams you would likely hear if someone was being tortured. This spurred me and the search team to look so quickly. We searched for hours, and when we didn't turn up anything, we were ready to head out for the day as night would be coming soon. Almost as though something or someone was listening, we heard a very distinct voice. It was my nephew's voice, and he seemed to be crying and asking for help. We called out in response to the voice, but all we heard was a continued plea for help. It was like a tape being played over and over, repeating the same broken, "Help!" before eventually stopping altogether. This made us push forward with what only few hours we had left to search somewhat safely. I remember frantically scrambling and internally praying my nephew was okay. As we continued our search, though, things were becoming less hopeful. We found one of his shirts in the cave. It was torn pretty badly and had blood heavily soaked into it. It was at this point I remember reeling in worry and feeling the tears begin to well up. One of the members of the team asked me to fall back, and I tried to fight them on it, but they were right. I needed to take a moment to step back, and part of me was afraid that I might find something that I don't want to see. The search would continue for another few weeks, and no matter how hard they searched, they never found anything outside of, identifying clothing. Nothing that would lead us to my nephew. Some things really bother me about this whole search, outside of the obvious thing, being I hurt for my missing nephew. Why was my nephew's gear at the entrance of the cave? Another thing that bothers me is if his gear was there, how the hell did he get so deep into the cave itself? Finally, where did he go? Caves are vast and massive things, and there's a strong chance he's still in there somewhere, or his remains are. It has become obvious as time goes on that he is no longer with the living. That is a reality I and the family have come to accept, and have had to accept that he is gone. It still hurts typing this out, honestly. I wish I had answers as to who or what brought him that deep into the cave. I still work in the area, and we still don't have any answers. Sometimes, though, I swear I hear his voice when I stand at the entrance to the cave. Whatever happened to you, my nephew, I pray you are in a better place now, and resting peacefully.
My name is Elizabeth. You can call me Liz for short. And I've been working for the Park Rangers service for a little over a year and a half. Because I've been working there for such a short time, and because I'd rather no one knows where I work or the area I live in, I won't be sharing that information. I wish to share an experience I had while working a job I still love today. To get to the point, we have a rather large park ranger department, and so, I'll admit, it was a little overwhelming when I first started there. That said, I quickly became friends with one of my shift partners, who we'll call Martin. We talked, laughed, and always found a way to pass the time, even during more mundane shifts. I felt comfortable talking to him, and I'll admit, I may have had a bit of a crush on him as well. That said, I'm a professional, and I kept our working relationship just that. Professional. It was a Friday, and we were all going home when another one of my coworkers pulled me aside and asked if they could talk to me for a second. I'll call this girl Clary. Thinking everyone was pretty cool so far, I figured I'd chill a moment and chat with Clary. The entire time she talked to me, she was nervous and fidgety. I asked if she was okay, but she just kept nodding. I smiled and told Clary I had to get back, but if there was anything she wanted to say, I could stick around for another minute or two. That was when she asked if I wanted to go to the bar and have a few drinks. She went from super nervous to oddly calm quickly, and began talking about how she was rather bored on weekends and didn't know too many people in the area. I just wanted someone to chat with who felt like she might be able to relate to or who could give advice, that sort of thing. I think in actuality, she felt more comfortable talking to another woman. Also, I'm only 5'4", and so I'm probably not that threatening. At least that is my thought process behind what she was thinking. I told her I had no plans, so sure, we can meet up and hang out. So later that night, I was getting ready to head to the bar when I stepped outside for a moment to smoke. Yes, I know, terrible habit, but I love it. so save your judgments for someone who cares enough to quit. Anyway, as I'm lighting up a cigarette, I look down and notice the tires on my Explorer are flat. Looking more closely, I notice all 4 tires are flat, and that they look as though they've been slashed. Now I'm feeling a little unsettled. I'm looking around, but I see and hear no one. Slowly, I step back inside and lock my door before calmly calling the police. I put out my cigarette and explain how I was going to head to the bar, but I found my tires had been slashed. Dispatch says someone is on the way, and so I wait. It takes them a bit to arrive, as I'm pretty far out in the middle of nowhere, and it generally isn't a quick trip to me, especially from the sheriff's station. Upon their arrival, it dawns on me how strange things are as a whole, and there doesn't appear to be vehicle tracks or anything leading up to my dirt driveway other than my own. Now, someone could be on foot, or very careful about covering their tracks, but again, I live way out in the middle of nowhere. So after the sheriff wraps up their report, I call Clary. I had all my co-workers' numbers in case of a work emergency, and they had mine, and explained the situation. She's bummed, but she then asks where I live and explains she'll pick me up if I still want to go out. I explained that I appreciate it, but I really don't want to go anywhere after everything, and so we both agree to go out another night. It takes me a while to go to bed, but when I finally do, I'm sleeping hard. The next morning, I get up and have some coffee and a cigarette. It is as I'm sitting there that Clary calls and asks if I want to go out next Friday, and even offers to pick me up from work next time until I can get my tires fixed. I thank her and we agree on this. Saturday night rolls around, and I'm about to head to bed when I hear a loud bang. It isn't persistent, but it's like someone hauling up and hitting my front door or something. It's enough to take me by surprise and make me leap 5 feet in the air. I grab my gun and head for the door. I rip it open and aim outside. It is completely silent. No one appears to be around. I notice some minor damage to the door, but nothing that would tell me who or what hit it. I shut the door, keep my gun nearby, and lock up for the night before heading to bed. It isn't long before I pass out. The events up to this point were strange, but I'm not easily scared, so it doesn't take me long to get to sleep, whereas I'm sure a lot of people might be bothered a bit more by it. Also, I have my gun. Anyway, the rest of the weekend goes by with no strange happenings or odd goings-on. Monday morning, I'm up early and ready to head out with Clary to work. I ask if she can come with me when I get my car towed after we get paid. She agrees, and Wednesday evening we get my car fixed. Clary and I are getting along really well by this point, and I'm grateful for her. We started to discuss our Friday plans, and we are mentally ready for the weekend, and we decide we'll hit the bar and see where the night takes us from there. Thursday is here quicker than ever, and I've come up a little early to help with the inspection of the national park. I'm doing my morning routines, and I have Clary and Martin with me. We're all chatting and enjoying our time when we suddenly hear a loud pop and one of our tires blow, causing me to lose control of the truck and make me crash into a tree. I check to be sure everyone's okay, and once I verify that we all get out to look around. It appears the tire that blew had something lodged in it. It was like razor wire, but looked more primitive in its creation. It was a rope with some kind of blades embedded within. This was strange and made us all feel uncomfortable. We tried to radio to the station, but we're the only ones on shift at the moment. Our boss would likely be there within an hour or so we couldn't do much but wait or head back without the truck. Knowing this, Martin, Claire, and I just kind of chilled for a bit and kept an eye out. We began discussing what happened based on what we pieced together. We were beginning to feel a little uneasy, as whoever had placed the trap had done so intentionally. That much was obvious. This made us on edge, and we decided at the moment to try and walk back to the station. It was while walking there that things grew quiet. Too quiet. There wasn't any real sound, and even the wind wasn't moving. We tried shaking it off and continued on. A few minutes later, we heard what sounded like our boss's voice, but our first instinct was to shrug it off and head towards the voice, but we got closer, it sounded more distorted. Something didn't feel right and we weren't exactly sure what it was. Our boss likely wouldn't have come out to find us so soon, and also, even if he had, something in the voice was really off. It was almost like something mimicking his voice. Weirded out, we continued onwards and tried radioing the station again, just in case our boss got there early. There was no response. I looked at my watch and realized our boss should have gotten in by now. I figured we would give it a few more minutes and we would try again. That's when we noticed the stench of rotting meat. I felt nausea hit me quickly, and that's when I saw something that turned me ghost white. There was a tall, emaciated figure with a skull for a head, staring down at us. At first, I thought it might have been some kind of weird art, but when it turned its head to look at us, I knew we had to run, and fast. We did just that. And as we ran, we heard the thing drop off the hill and come after us. The three of us felt terrified as we pushed forward, and Martin quickly stopped. I stopped, turned and asked him if he was stupid. He gave this forgiving me look and ran in a different direction. The thing that was chasing us quickly followed in his direction. I remember screaming Martin's name, and Claire frantically getting onto her radio and calling the station. We got a response from one of our co-workers asking if we were okay. They sounded just as frantic as we tried to rush back to the station. When we arrived, several sheriff officers were coordinating off the area. Our boss had been attacked by what police said was likely a bear. He was alive, but he looked terrified. I quickly explained to the sheriff that we had been attacked in the woods. I then explained how Martin split from us and lured the thing we were attacked by away. I tried to plead with them that it wasn't a bear, but they thought maybe we were delirious from shock. I remember how angry I was. But, I don't blame them for not believing what we saw. With all that said, they did immediately start a search as they did believe we had been attacked. Sadly, Martin was never found. He still hasn't been seen or heard from in days. I honestly believe he's dead. That sounds grim, and it's really messed up, but what other explanation do you really have? I'm working in a different area now, but Claire and I are still friends today. We miss Martin, and if you take anything from this story, please remember to be safe out there. There are things out in the woods and in this world that we can't explain. I don't wish anyone to ever go through what my boss, Claire, and I have, and I sure as hell wish for no one to ever wind up like Martin.
My name is Erica, and I'm a 32-year-old park ranger who's been in the park rangers in Alaska for 10 years now. I really enjoy the frontier feel of Alaska, and how much it isn't really touched by man, or modern man at least. There are a lot of woods and mountains, and it's a great place to live. If you're someone who likes to mind your own and be away from people, there are plenty of places for you that make you seem like you're just in heaven, and I would recommend living right here if that's who you are. My story takes place in December, while working on the job. I was enjoying nature in the cold while killing time near the end of my shift. I had finished everything I needed to do for the day, and then some, and didn't have a real excuse to cut out early, so I figured I'd drive around and kill some time while I waited to pass the final hour of my shift. It was while doing this that it began to snow, and I'm talking sudden snowing that wasn't forecasted. It was hard enough and windy enough that I couldn't tell about the direction I was headed in, or if I was still headed straight at all. Because of this, I decided to slow down and stop the truck. I couldn't really step out as it was too cold and windy at the time, and I figured if this snowstorm was so sudden, it was likely it'd be out just as quickly as it had arrived. This extremely optimistic position of mine was slowly ruined as the hour passed and I was supposed to be back at the station and clocking out. I tried to radio back, but the weather was too powerful and all I could get on the truck radio was static. Figuring there wasn't much to do, I hunkered down and just thought about snuggling up next to a warm fire later that night and how nice it would feel once the storm finally passed. About an hour went by and I still couldn't get anywhere. I was beginning to get worried now, as this was a strong and sudden storm, and as such, it was likely snow had begun to accumulate to the point to where I might not be able to get out before long. I decided I'd stay in the truck, however, as going out would be suicide, and this was the warmest place I could be. Another hour goes by and I try to radio again, but I get nothing. I'm beginning to feel the fear welling up on my stomach. I'm not exactly prepared for the weather at hand. I'm dressed warmly as it is Alaska during the winter, but I'm not prepared to be out here for a long period of time, nor was I expecting to be. Part of my mind calms itself down when it sets in that they have to be looking for me. My boss wouldn't leave if I hadn't clocked out. I wasn't outside an area they wouldn't be able to find me, but again, the snow is vicious in its fall at this point, and maybe they're unable to search for me properly. Another hour goes by and I try the door. I can't open it. The snow has begun to bury my truck, and now I'm really starting to become fearful for my life. It is getting dark, not that I can tell the difference in the storm itself, and it dawns on me that I might have to spend at least the night out here. I try to radio one more time, but it's all static. The storm is interfering with everything, and I find myself unprepared and without any sign of aid coming. It isn't long before I hear a loud thud against the passenger side door. I jump at first and call out shortly after. I hear nothing in response. I then hear a roar that sounds similar to a bear. I begin to panic, but I stop and remind myself the bear doesn't know I'm in here. For sure, and it isn't likely to get inside. I can hear it jump onto the front of my truck and climb on the top. I hear it sniffing around and then roar one more time before I feel it drop off the back of the truck, and soon after it leaves. The truck shakes as the weight of the bear is relieved from it, and soon everything falls quiet once again. It isn't long before it is 10 at night and I'm beginning to shiver from the cold. I'm still unable to open my door, and I'm quite sure the exhaust pipe in the truck is buried. Because of this, I don't want to turn the truck on for fear of carbon monoxide poisoning. I instead curl up and try to conserve whatever warmth I have while waiting for help to arrive. I'm cold, unprepared, and hungry. I'm afraid I may die out here, as it is extremely cold and I'm not sure if I can stay warm enough to even survive the night. Eventually, I drift off to a half sleep. I still remember the dream because I was dreaming I was warm, next to a nice fire, and I couldn't have been further from my actual situation, mentally. I'm awoken at about 3 or 4 in the morning, and it dawns on me that I feel like a popsicle at this point. I can't feel my toes or anything else, for that matter, and there's the sound of something mechanical going on outside. I can hear voices, and when my brain finally catches up, I feel myself filled with relief, as one of the voices is my boss. They found my truck. The storm had subsided and they were digging me out. I wound up being rushed to the hospital where I was treated for several things, one of which included losing my pinky and ring finger on my right hand due to frostbite. I made a full recovery otherwise, but I did spend a little while in the hospital and on paid leave while recovering. I'm alive and grateful for that, every day.
I'm going to keep this brief. A few years ago, while I was working, I was a park ranger around Louisiana, 20 years retired now. I saw something I don't know how to explain in the woods. The thing I saw was roughly 12 feet tall and it was extremely hairy. It moved quickly too. I know this because it chased me out of the woods one fall morning in October a few years back. I was patrolling the area, looking for anyone that might be causing trouble or anything that might need doing when I came across this creature. I didn't quite believe my own sight at the time, but it was very much real. I'm not going to claim it was Bigfoot or anything, as I'm a pretty skeptical person, but it was big enough to be something like that. It was super aggressive though. I showed up, saw it, and as though it could sense me, it turned and looked at me. It immediately let out this strange call, and that's when I see one of its buddies coming walking from further in the woods. Again, my eyes are just seeing things, I think, but I'm just thinking I have to be hallucinating. Suddenly, the both of them let out an angry call, and the one I initially saw starts running right for me. Now, I'm a country boy born and raised, and I've seen some things, so I don't spook easily, but this, well, it had me turning and running in terror. I didn't hesitate either, as this thing let out a call. I call it a call as I can't even truly describe the sound that came from this thing, and it shook me where I ran. I was convinced at this moment I was going to die from something no one likely knows or even has proof that it exists. I'm older now, and I don't run the fastest, and I was convinced I'd be dead soon, but as I reached the tree line, this thing stopped. I took a break to breathe and looked back, and it stared, and it let out another call. I was convinced by this point it might still come after me, but then it turned and walked off slowly into the forest. Now, you gotta understand, the thing likely could have caught up to me if it wanted, probably killed me. So, while aggressive, I'm not convinced it was out to kill me, per se. I think it was just likely saying, hey, this is my territory, or home even. It just wanted me to get the heck out of Dodge. I don't rightly have a better explanation, honestly, as again, it could have easily killed me. At any rate, I thought I'd share this story with y'all, and hopefully it's used. I hope y'all know I never went back to those woods the rest of my career. I stayed right at the station, which is where I should have stayed to begin with. I'm retired now, though, and I'm quite happy. Thank you for letting me share my story.
I've been working as a park ranger for roughly 17 years. In all that time, I've had a few experiences I would deem strange, and one I would even deem scary. The one I'm going to share with you is a little bit of both. Mostly was terrifying for me. You can call me Trent, by the way. I believe it was 2009, and my team and I were working to clean the area and get it ready for the summer camping season here in Colorado. Now, it's a national park, so there's not a ton we have to do. We like to go around and do cleanup in our area, as you do. As obviously, people don't really bother and quite honestly really care about cleaning up after themselves. It's one of those things that gets on my nerves. It isn't hard to clean up your trash, but anyway, that's, another topic. It was getting later and I volunteered to stay later that evening to make sure as much cleanup was in order as possible. The idea, for me at least, was to get as much done as I could while we still had light. It being summer soon, we had plenty of light in comparison to the fall and winter, when it gets dark stupid early. It wasn't long before everyone was clocking out, and I told them all bye and I'd see them on Monday. None of my crew I worked with on my shift worked weekends, though we did have a few within the department itself who did. An hour goes by and then two, and before I know it, I'm so wrapped up in my tasks that I look up and realize I'm losing daylight. Thinking little of this, I put myself in another gear and try to get more done. In my mind, I figure it'll just be better prepared and leave less to do on Monday. Also, I take great pride in my work, so I tend to do anything I can no matter how large or small the task. It's a large part of what has led up to the promotions I've been given, and is something I still do to this very day. It isn't long before I realize the sun is about to set completely. I stop my work, pull out my flashlight, and prepare to haul my last garbage bag back to the station and drop it in the dumpster. It is as I'm wrapping things up I hear a large growling sound. I immediately grab my bear spray as I recognize the sound I'm hearing. Turning around, slowly, I see something that leaves me in shock and dread. It looks to be a black bear, but the problem is, it is much, much larger than any black bear I have ever seen or ever known to exist. This thing was a large bear. This thing had a large scar across the left eye and was staring at me, baring its teeth. Now, normally, I do something to make the bear think I'm bigger than it is, but no. I was terrified, and no amount of posturing is going to save me from something this size. It didn't seem possible. On all fours, this thing looked to be 12 to 13 feet tall. I didn't believe my eyes at first, but there was no denying it. The thing stood in the air, and I about peed myself in fear. I wanted to run, I knew running would only encourage it to give chase. I didn't exactly feel safe standing here though. So, I continued to keep my eyes on this thing as it slowly backed away. The thing was, I'd found my way far off the trails and was quite a ways from the station itself. Normally this isn't an issue, but, of course, being me, trying to be an overachiever, I got screwed. I'm sitting there thinking about what my next move might be, while I'm very slowly backing away. I know it isn't wise to stare this thing down, but there was also no way I was going to turn my back to this bear either. I have my hand on my mace and the other hand is holding the garbage. After what feels like an eternity, I am finally out of sight of the bear. It appears to have just stared at me, but now I'm worried the reason it was attracted to me was it was looking for the food in the garbage I was carrying. While what I'm carrying is nothing that I'd eat, it did have some old food in it. I'm sure it's nothing a bear would think twice about if it was hungry enough. And if I was the size of this thing, I'd be hungry all the time. After several minutes of watching the horizon and seeing nothing, I turn and start hauling my butt as fast as I can toward the station. It is still quite a ways off, but I figure I can probably get there if I keep hauling butt. I'll get there in no time. It is while running that I suddenly hear a large stomping sound behind me. Looking back, the bear is coming in fast. I freak out and throw the bag of trash I have off at a different direction. My hope is that it would just want the food, and I could come back another day and clean up what was left. But unfortunately ignored it entirely and kept coming for me. I am now forced to turn and stand my ground as there is no way. I'm going to outrun this thing, there's just no way. I stop and pull the bear mace off my belt and prep to spray the thing. It stops and eyes me, and then the mace, and then me again. It's only a few feet from me now, and to my shock, it seems very aware of what I'm ready to do. The look of this bear made it seem like it was calculating its next move. I've seen a lot of bears and usually they'll scare off without too much trouble or even just mind their own business entirely. This one though, the look on its face just said it was hunting, and I was on the menu. It seemed disturbingly intelligent, and as it stepped forward, I reacted in shock and sprayed it in the face with my mace. The bear reeled back. I ran for my garbage bag, though looking back I'm not sure why I did that, and I continued my sprint toward the direction of the station. I heard the most terrifying roar I've ever heard in my entire life, and this was followed by a large, now all too familiar stomping sound. I'm feeling my legs begin to give away from fear, but I tell myself if you give out now you're dead. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So, I gain the mental fortitude to keep pushing through and keep steady as I run. It is as I'm getting closer to the cabin I feel the thing running up on me from behind. I freak out and spin to see where it's at, tripping as I do and falling on my butt. The thing had taken a swipe and left a deep claw mark in the tree where my head was only seconds before. It thrashes about blindly, and during the thrashing and my struggle to get up, it hits my can of spray and dislodges it from my grip. It does this with enough force for my hand to fly back and hit the tree. I see blood and feel pain as my hand smacked the tree. Unsure if I had broken my right hand, I used my left hand to stand up again. For reasons I'll never be sure of, perhaps shock and some semblance of normalcy, I grab the trash bag with my left hand and turn and continue sprinting. The bear is roaring behind me, but it doesn't appear to be giving pursuit. It isn't long before I reach one of the main trails and can see the cabin in the distance. Terrified, I keep running. Soon enough, there is a roar so loud I am not ashamed to admit I peed myself a bit, followed by the familiar stomping of this bear. I freaked out and just keep telling myself, don't look back, don't look back, do not look back. I run with all the power and speed I can muster. I make it to the station. I open the door and slam it shut, locking it behind me. As I do, I feel the door's foundation shake as this bear seems to be slamming against it. I barricade the door with some tables and what I can find immediately. I also use the phone to call 911. The dispatcher answers and I'm doing my best to explain where I am and my situation. I know how crazy it sounds as the dispatcher reassures me help is on the way. It doesn't take the police more than 5 minutes to arrive. To me at least, it felt like 5 hours. By the time they came knocking, I feel myself leap up in shock and terror at the sound. It is then I remove the tables and slowly open the door. I am shaking as I try to explain the entire situation, and I feel tears involuntarily begin to stream down my face as I try to explain the impossible situation to the cops. Eventually, an officer sits with me, and so does the sheriff, and they try to take time to calm me down. They ask if I need medical attention, and I tell them no. They insist anyways. I seem to be in shock. I don't remember much of that part. That's what they tell me when I went to the hospital. As I was leaving the station, I remember looking back at the door and seeing a large claw mark on our door. Now, I haven't seen this bear since that day. It hasn't turned up, and as far as I know, no one has been attacked by it. All that said, this is a situation that will stay with me for the rest of my lifetime. Thanks for listening to these creepy and downright unexplainable park ranger stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button. And if you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a park ranger story, a search and rescue story, or something completely different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. Much love and appreciation to my friend, Vidif22, and my other friend, NightDocs, who helped me read these stories today. If you enjoyed their voices, please be sure to check out their channels and subscribe. You can find the links to do so in the top of the description. They upload very creepy videos almost every single day, just like me. Now, if you're not aware, you can download your favorite scary stories from the swamp on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, Stitcher Radio, and just about every other major podcast platform out there. If you made it all the way to the end, be sure to comment the code word, Red Circle, to let me know that you made it to the end and to confuse anybody who didn't. I always love seeing how creative you guys get with your responses down there. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.